Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. This is Crypto Gordon Freeman, and you are listening to the Club 21M podcast. I'm happy to say that this is the 10th episode of the podcast, and you'll be listening to a special conversation that I had with my friend Jake Woodhouse from the other side of the planet in Australia. He's a friend in the Bitcoin community, and I've provided a link to his newsletter, and you can also find him at bitcoinwithjake.com. That's a pretty easy one to remember. So make sure and check that out. I will also let you know that about 16 or so minutes in, I will interrupt to tell you that we had a power outage at about 16 minutes in, and the conversation picks back up immediately after. So I apologize for that little disruption, but we got to talk about everything that we wanted to. So please enjoy. So this is Gordon Freeman, and I'm here with my friend Jake Woodhouse. And I sure appreciate you joining me on this, our first time doing a podcast like this together. So thank you so much for joining me, Jake.
Thank you for having me, Gordon. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So one of the things I'd really like to do with this podcast is just basically making new friends in Bitcoin. And, you know, I don't know whether it was just following the same thread in Twitter that, you know, I go digging when I haven't seen somebody's name before. But I just had a feeling that we might be on a similar path. I looked up a page that you had of resources of a lot of things that you've learned about Bitcoin. So I was like, this guy seems like we might hit it off. So I'm really glad that you decided to join me. And this is one of those things where, you know, I just think that the more people that are interested in Bitcoin and even just blockchain and cryptocurrency that have these kind of conversations, the more it provides a platform for other people to learn about it and not be so feel like it's such a daunting thing or an unknown thing in crypto. So that's what we're doing here, is just have a conversation about Bitcoin.
Awesome. That's really, I spend a lot of my time talking about it, to be honest. So it's always amazing to connect with people, especially on a global basis. You know, the fact that you can, as you mentioned, Twitter, within 3 clicks, you're on someone's profile, another click, you're on their website. And I've made a small website called Bitcoin with Jake, and it's got, actually, I calculated only about 150 hours worth of content on it so far, but is everything that I've personally been through. And, you know, you've got people who are hardcore kind of techies through to macro investors, through to entrepreneurs, through to authors and economists. And it's just extraordinary the amount of information that's actually out there that is essentially free, or, you know, perhaps you choose to buy a book and that's cost you $15 or something. And then here we are, as you mentioned, Gordon, you connect online, you have a chat, and absolutely we have stuff in common. Bitcoin is the most exciting subject I've ever come across in my life, and more than happy to make friends around it, learn more. I think one of the funnest parts of it is everyone's journey to Bitcoin is different. It's completely unique.
Yes.
And often that brings different insights as to why it's an important innovation. And that's what I really love talking about.
That's so well said. That's absolutely the key. And, you know, I enjoyed our first conversation, and it's really so fascinating. You know, first of all, you know, I'm in the States and you're on the other side of the world, and it's probably easier for us to connect about Bitcoin than it was for me to figure out the time zones, you know. But it's an amazing space, and it's like the more that you learn about it, the more it reveals more things that you didn't know. And so I feel like this conversation could continue a year from now, when we'd probably have a completely unique conversation, and we didn't exactly sound like we were clueless the first time. So, you know, it's just really, it's a great thing to connect over.
Yeah, I was trying to write a newsletter, which I'm about to start, and I thought a few analogies, and like Bitcoin is kind of like seeing an iceberg. You can only see the very top of it when you first hear about it, and it's not until you actually see what's under the surface that you realize how much more there is going on. Or that phrase of, you know, there's a lot more than meets the eye.
Right.
It's not a hard analogy to think of, but, you know, the first time you hear about it, it's like an alternative money. or digital money or, a blockchain. You don't even know what this stuff is really. And one's so heavily conditioned to believe in the status quo, and whether it be pounds or dollars or, yen or RMB or whatever your country's currency might be. And it's very easy to ignore it and say absolute load of hocus pocus bollocks. and
right.
And slowly but surely it sucks you in. And I've been trying to think of an eloquent way of explaining that situation. I do like that that idea of there's a lot more that meets the eye as a subject. And
absolutely.
It really goes into the very essence of being human. Like, what is it that makes us human? Well, social structures, the ability to tell stories, the ability to trade. And it's all driven in many ways by how we communicate with each other. And it seems to me that the status quo is broken, favors a small minority at the top, and we're told that it's good for us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no. Believe in the system, believe everything's right. And until you start asking questions, why? Like, something will happen in your life. Why? Whether you're in Venezuela or in Lebanon right now, why the fuck have I got no money? Oh, because these guys can just print more of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got hyperinflation situations. Or, as in my personal case, I was trying to protect wealth. My father died young. I received some money from my early 20s. I've been investing in a number of different assets. It's fucking hard to actually create returns on a regular basis. Like, everyone says property's a no-brainer. Well, what happens if you buy a property that's got two arguing leaseholders, has old issues with it that were never covered in the legal kind of background check, and suddenly you've got an asset that hasn't gone up in price because some macro things have changed. You can't sell it because some regulations have been increased from a tenancy perspective, and your tenants get 6 months or 12 months before they can leave. Your money is stuck in an asset that you can't get back out. Or you buy stocks and shares through a wealth management company and they get 1% regardless of performance.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know where your money's gone.
Right.
And these are all things that are deemed as normal, totally fine. Oh, this is fine. But actually, why? Why is that normal? Mm-hmm. And through learning about Bitcoin, you suddenly go, hang on, what the hell's going on here? And it's a fascinating subject. Maybe I could ask you, Gordon. So, what was the moment that brought you into Bitcoin? Like, there's often I find a few touches or touch points that has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
First you get told about it by a friend, or then you buy a little bit, and then you sell some for a stupid reason or whatever. I'd love to hear what it was that initially got your interest.
Right. And I mean, it's amazing that I think there's a thread of the light bulb going off, their aha moment, but everybody comes at it from a different angle. So for me, I was aware of Bitcoin pretty early in the game. And I had one of those friends they lean towards more of the tech side of this kind of stuff, but a very libertarian minded person, which I, personally, that's not my affiliation, but I agree with a lot of the tenets of what they would believe. So anyway, this is one of those people that whenever something in Bitcoin happens, they're posting it to their social media. And so, I would get one of those things where it says Bitcoin is now worth $1. And, then you don't hear anything for a while. And then, Bitcoin is now worth $10. And I'm like, okay. So, I do a little bit of digging, and I've actually done a lot of research in other areas. The biggest chunk of it starting back in around 2011 or so. And I won't go off on a tangent there, but I had a pretty good feel for a lot of things that have built into history and what different types of governments and the way that they try to control social norms and just society in general, that they all have, going back as far as we can look, there's something that becomes some kind of standard for trade or barter other than just goods. And it says a lot about, the economics say a lot about that government or that country at that time. So as a general interest, when I would hear these Bitcoin things, I'd say, well, the currency part of cryptocurrency makes me think that if Bitcoin really is becoming a thing, then it's not really going to get a chance once it is a threat. Because, currency is currency. We have a mindset, you're not supposed to go there. You're not allowed to challenge fiat. You're not allowed to challenge the legal tender. So I was interested at $1. I was interested at $10. I was even interested at $100. And I was thinking, well, there's that guy that I know, and a lot of people way before me probably are really happy right now because, I mean, I was just aware of, at first you could even, mine off of a laptop. That went away pretty quickly. But, so even through that time, it didn't really fully click. But a family member actually gave paper wallet or, just paper private keys of Litecoin as a Christmas present. And that got the first serious in-person conversation about that whole area, because I had studied local currencies, digital currencies of different types, and the idea, the construct of there being something better than something like a PayPal or a service. All these things have been floating around for a long time, but now I actually had something. And so I was like, okay, well, what do I do with this? This isn't on a computer. So, where do I go to? www.litecoin.com and I can redeem this, so that started things. But then it was also this was right around the time that Binance had just come on the scene. And so my questions were all like, I had studied that there were people teaching that basically there would be something very similar to like a parallel to the stock exchange. And so I started researching the exchanges, and, I saw some of what are the choices in America, which I was a little disheartened that we were taking a very overly cautious, warning signs everywhere. You'll lose everything if you get into crypto kind of mentality. But, so there was Kraken and Gemini and Coinbase and a few places. But Binance to me was, first of all, they were showing volume. And volume to me meant interest. The more people that are doing something, the more activity is there. So at that point in time, the journey, I obviously, just going through the process of buying my own, but I became interested in testing the trading side of things, and a very unique situation. I'll try to not go too long into this because it's just one question.
No. It's all interesting.
It's the big question. So I mentioned to you how I have a background in the music industry, and particularly over the years, I've designed my own audio software, and that it's one of those processes that you only understand it if you're one of those weirdos that do it, because it's so redundant and time consuming that you really have to have other things that are keeping your mind going while you do these like thousands of hours of analysis of things. But that kind of had pre-trained my mind for the trading side of things. I look at patterns, I see patterns and things. And so I found that I was actually very good at trading. And the more that I learned about what other people do, the more I kind of disagreed with the things that would get them stuck. So like what you were saying, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, it's very difficult. Whatever you do that succeeds, that works, is very difficult to repeat. And it's one of those things where if it was that easy, everybody would be doing it. So, there's been a lot of learning in the process, but, what I found is that the entire market, by that time, there was already Ethereum, there was already Litecoin, there was already the hard fork to Ethereum Classic. And I got there in the middle of the Bitcoin Cash, or I like to call it Bitcoin crash, the hard fork, the hash wars, and then, it's splitting a second time to BSB and seeing all the warring of factions going on. And the more delicate all of these projects that had people that you could hold accountable to these things, the bigger and more important Bitcoin seemed to me. That, everybody had their different, they were chasing after these coins and saying, this one is now 3% the size of Bitcoin. This one's now 1.2% the size of, and I'm like, okay, Bitcoin dominance is the standard that every single other thing that people are interested in is being compared to. So all they're really doing by pushing their products to me is showing how important Bitcoin is. So that kind of became my perspective that, it really hasn't changed since that time. Everything else has just been the insane roller coaster that the process has been.
Oh, I mean, Gordon, wow, so much to pick up on there. So first off, the way you describe getting given some Litecoin is what I kind of call getting skin in the game.
Yes.
And so I constantly spend my time. So any friend that I ever talk to about Bitcoin, I'm like, just buy some, just buy $100, doesn't matter. If you've got any spare money, buy it. And what in my opinion, happens at that point is you have a vested interest in what the hell it's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get people to read or watch or listen to as much as you can advise, and they never do it. But when they suddenly, like my mum recently, I got her to buy £100 worth of Bitcoin a few months ago, now worth £157.
Mm-hmm.
It's gone up 57% in a matter of months.
Right.
It's extraordinary, right? And she's now like, well, what's going on? And we've worked on a deal with within my family, and we've actually, made a larger investment in Bitcoin with some funds that we have in a trust, which is very exciting. And it's through that process of experiencing that people begin to start understanding what it might be. But to your point, so it's all very well saying, oh, I found out about it at $1 or $10, or I've got friends that bought it back then. But anyone who's actually held on to Bitcoin core effectively the whole way through has been on a rough fucking ride.
Oh, yes.
There has been so many times Bitcoin's dead. This particular discussion you mentioned about Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV, I've just read a wonderful book called The Block Size War.
Yes.
And through that book, it's possible to hear about what was going on at the time, and that the guys who were pushing for bigger block size, they were actually the most vocal. And to the layman who would have been following the market from the side, they would have been the obvious side to choose. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people ended up buying serious positions in Bitcoin Cash with their Bitcoin on the basis they thought that would go up. I mean, I myself, having bought in 2015, by 2017, I'd sold some to go on a holiday. I'd sold some to go traveling for a long kind of sabbatical style trip. And I actually sold my Bitcoin Cash for a 1980s Mercedes SL from a guy called Black the Ripper in London. And I knew that I wanted just to hold Bitcoin. So as soon as I got those copied across coins that were Bitcoin Cash, I bought something physical with them. So I got that car for nothing in many ways. It lasted about 2 months. I sold it. It leaked. It broke down the whole time. It's the worst thing I ever bought. But the point being is that you may well have bought Bitcoin cheap, but the risk was extraordinarily high.
So this is that place where we had to continue the conversation after a power outage. So please continue listening. Yeah, when we're talking about just what is that light bulb moment for people with Bitcoin, if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking through, you're talking about when the hard forks happened and they had the Bitcoin Cash and what your Mercedes purchase and that part of the story, moving forward to where you're talking about the decision to have a family trust.
Yeah, so I was just summarizing how many times I experienced Bitcoin before I really took it seriously, I think. Reversing back 10, 12 years, my father died. We sold our family home and I received money at a young age, quite unlike most people, frankly. Through that, I've been interested in long-term wealth preservation. And I have invested in a number of different asset classes. I've used a number of different services. So just a brief summary, I've made investments in physical property. I've made investments through wealth management companies into the stock market and bonds, etc. And I've also looked at alternative things on my own, such as cryptocurrency. And I first purchased Bitcoin in 2015. I then sold some 2016, sold some 2017. And during that time, it was for different reasons, like, made a bit of money, maybe I'll go on holiday. Or I went traveling for a bit and spent some Bitcoin during that time, thinking, hey, I've just got free money from this purchase I've made. And I researched a little bit and read about what I now know is the block size war. And I've just read a great book about that. So I highly recommend it if anyone hasn't read the block size war. But the long story short was it was a very tumultuous time in the development of Bitcoin. And as a very fringe part of the ecosystem, I read some mainstream media. I didn't look into it properly. The loudest voices were very much pushing for larger block size. And that's what ended up becoming Bitcoin Cash after the hard fork. I ended up selling all of my Bitcoin Cash in exchange for a 1980s Mercedes SL that was
it was about £6,000 worth of car at the time. And so I effectively got a free car out of that fork. And it was a useless car. It leaked and it broke down the whole time with a flat battery. And my now wife used to hate sitting in the front seat because it smelled. And it was useless, but I thought it was pretty cool at the time. And through that till, the top of that peak market, 2017, 2018 Christmas. And you're like, holy shit, I'm still sitting on, a few Bitcoin here that are now worth, almost 20 grand a coin at one point, whatever it was. And how awesome, and I've basically ridden that wave to now we're in 2021 and the spot price is whatever it is, $45,000 US. So already double the peak of 2017. But it wasn't until probably October of 2020 that I really started taking Bitcoin seriously from a wealth preservation perspective. Mm-hmm. So the point of this recap being the touch points that you have to the technology are multiple times you have an effect with it or you connect with it in some way to build up what is now something I trust implicitly and have, spent the best part of a year researching every spare moment of my life. And I've moved a percentage of my net wealth into the asset class, and I intend to do more so. And that's for a number of reasons. But to answer your original question, I went on holiday with Bitcoin profits. I went traveling with Bitcoin profits. I sold Bitcoin because I thought it was all going to crash with the fork. And it's really very difficult just to hodl. Like people underestimate, wish I'd bought it at $100 a coin or whatever. Well, that's great. But when it's 10 grand a coin and you've made 100x on your purchase, well, people sell because they buy a car like I did, or whatever stupid shit they want to actually purchase with their money because they're still thinking in this mindset of gains in US dollar or GBP or whatever it might be.
Right.
So I'll stop talking there, but yeah, it's very, very interesting from my experience how many times you have to be touched by Bitcoin before you go, fucking hell, this is incredibly important to study this and get your head around it because it's going to change the way the world works. So to anyone listening about Bitcoin for the first time, don't worry, there's a shitload to learn. Everyone's always learning. Even the people who've been in the industry for as long as you can be, 12 years, they're still learning new stuff. And so getting stuck in, getting a bit of skin in the game, which we covered before. So put $100 in, start studying, see what happens to it. Why does it go up? Why does it go down? What's going on? And that really kind of starts to suck you in. And today it's an absolute passion of mine, and hopefully will be the cornerstone of the rest of my career. Frankly, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, I agree on so many different points that you make there, and that having that real context, that point of something physical and tangible. That's what changed my interest from just kind of being piled in other things that I studied about global economics and saying, wait a second, this really feels like a moment in time and I need to understand this better. So, I can definitely appreciate that, but also just the fact that, you've actually been invested into the experience earlier than I did, but I think we all saw that something was kind of changing into the next leg of the journey in that 2017, 2018 era. It's kind of funny, part of it is that the world outside of cryptocurrency only gets the message from mass media when something really big or really something terrible happens. And so you almost always hear, when Bitcoin has fallen from its grace from 20,000 down to, 12 or 8 or, something. And they'll say, oh, the volatility, stay away. And it's like, well, you understand that there are people that got in at $400, $500 that are not, they're still not bummed out at 12,000, So that context is certainly there. But,
and also that process, Gordon, that in a sense is part of what becoming a Bitcoiner is. Like you buy in and it flies up and you're like, sweet, okay. And then it flies back down. You're like,
yes.
Right. Shit. Okay. Maybe it wasn't such a good idea or whatever, but it's just such a monumentally disruptive technology that we don't really conceive how important it is without what the kind of the price action does. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so much you see, all across Bitcoin, Twitter, and podcasts, etc. Came for the price gain, stayed for the revolution.
Yes.
And that's something that just really chimes so clearly, because even I'm just starting a weekly newsletter, looking at 3 subjects that I've found interesting, or stories over the previous 7 days, and I'll release my first one later today. And this is a subject that I will talk about in the newsletter for sure, because everyone likes to make money. It's within our nature to get ahead, the self-interest angle of the human psyche.
Mm-hmm.
And it's genuinely built into Bitcoin, and it's like a natural marketing tool. The price action, it flies up, and everyone's like, I made shitloads of money on Bitcoin. They tell all their friends about it, and then their friends buy it, and then they all get wrecked. But then that's their first contact to it. And then 4 years later, had they just held on to it, they'd now be double, triple their money. They go,
right,
hang on, what the hell is this stuff? And then they look again. And it's this fascinating idea that the price action is what sucks people in from a self-interest perspective. So the game theory at play is just wonderful when you start to understand actually how it's working. And where's it going to take us? Who knows? But once you get into it, you then go, well, hang on, what is money? Why am I looking at this asset class? Why can't I send stuff around the world of value straight to a friend if I wanted to? What is the central bank? What is fiat money? Hang on, what the fuck's going on here?
right.
And I went to a business school. I've got a BA in business management. We studied banking regulation. We studied macroeconomics, microeconomics, maths and statistics. We looked at, how to make money, but never once did we actually sit down and say, well, hang on, what is money? And again, shout out to Robert Breedlove. If you haven't listened or read any of his work, the What is Money podcast on YouTube. I've listened to all of the episodes with Michael Saylor and then with Jeff Booth, and it's 20 hours of these guys just shooting the shit about what money actually is. And it's just phenomenally interesting in terms of the historical context, how key trade is, why humans like to even converse with each other, what technology means from a deflationary perspective, and how it chimes into human rights, how it chimes into climate change as a discussion, and long-term sustainability on the planet. And it's just the most fascinating subject I've ever come across.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like I've gone on a bit of a rant and a sideways chant there, but it's so interesting.
But that's what it does. It encapsulates everything that is significant in every other category. And that's why I love what you're saying, because you have a background where you've learned these things, and you have a context of business and understanding how the banking system works and everything. But this is truly transformative, and it truly takes things that you think that you understand and gives an entirely new premise to them. So, something that could have been just, okay, well, that was a fun experiment in cryptography, and now we know just one more thing about human nature that doesn't work. But 12 years of Bitcoin finding its place in the context of everything else. And so it becomes more significant the more it challenges those things. And I love, especially looking at a market which I firmly believe, some maximalists will not agree with me on this, but I firmly believe in allowing the market, the greater cryptocurrency world, to do what it's doing. And, regulation is going to be necessary in some areas and maybe better left alone in others, and let us kind of self-govern, self-work these things out. But I think that the more things that push against the arguments for and against Bitcoin, the more they show how important they absolutely, whoever Satoshi or, they were, they nailed it from the beginning, the scarcity model, but not just jumping straight in with the scarcity model, releasing the coins over a certain period of time. I saw, discussions were happening 2012, 13, and 14 about the nature of mining and how that would advance with the computers, and looking at Moore's law and all the technology side of things. And, prior to working out something that could basically do PayPal without needing PayPal, I mean, we had the idea of digital money and the digital movement of money and letting them deal with resolving transactions and remittance at the end of the day. We didn't have to deal with that on our end. But when you remove the system from the system and you allow the technology to basically create a new standard of value for something, the hardware actually matters. Resolving things, if it matters to a person or a country about sustainability and future looking, it only adds to the benefits of Bitcoin to resolve those things. Where there's other people that look at Bitcoin and say, stay out of it. The more energy it uses, the better, because it matters. It's a significant enough thing that it's a good use of energy, by golly. And we may be trying really hard to mine those last couple of blocks sometime in the 2040s, or I've heard 2044, I think, or something. I can't imagine, especially with the political climate the way that it's been post 2020, that there won't be incredibly large leaps in the sustainability movement and renewables, and certainly something beyond the electrical, moving to the battery, away from combustibles and that kind of thing. So there's no aspect of things that are interesting for human beings to discuss that Bitcoin doesn't suddenly become an incredibly important part of.
And this is what's so cool about it as a subject to study. And I just wrote this in my kind of introductory newsletter last week. First and foremost, Bitcoin exists and it's not going away. And so therefore, every single person in the world is going to be affected by it, whether they like it or not, or whether they're interested or not.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, learning about it today gives you an opportunity to front run everyone else. So that's a good reason to do it from a self-interest perspective.
Right.
But the second great angle is that it covers economics, it covers philosophy, it covers trade, it covers human rights, it covers mental health, it covers sustainability, it covers so many different subjects from a perspective of positive social impact, from a perspective of just faster, stronger, smarter technology than what currently exists. And therefore, actually, anyone who has an interest in those, what I would say, very varied set of subjects, has got an angle on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so interesting, in my opinion. For
Absolutely.
example, you will have read some of Alex Gladstein's work, who is the human rights activist, and he describes Bitcoin as the people's money. And there's a great kind of 2-minute long YouTube that he's got from 2017, a presentation he made, I think, just explaining how central bank digital coins are coming, how those banks are going to be using this, probably very, very nicely designed, decent UX as a way of also surveilling their populace and
Right.
either censoring them or taxing them or making them behave in a certain way, coercing them into what the centralized government wants, and how important Bitcoin is in relation to that kind of digitalization of central banking, because it gives you leverage. It suddenly means you can store wealth outside of the system of the nation state. And actually that's incredibly important. And that's a human right angle to this whole discussion. Or you touched on, for example, the sustainability discussion. And there are so many angles to this when it comes to Bitcoin, which, fascinate me. I personally spent, quite a few years. I did some investing in early stage clean technology companies, and I was looking for businesses that I thought would be in relation to Paris Agreement regulations and were part of the future electrified economy. So I was looking at solar startups, I was looking at wind startups, I was looking at food waste startups, a number of different areas that had sustainability angles. And that's all very well, but the whole investment thesis was basically, it was basically built off of a regulatory change.
Right.
It's not a free market innovation like clean tech. It's regulatory driven, which I still believe is an opportunity, but it's also still built on extraordinary growth. And every single one of those small startups that I put money into, you're looking to 10, 100x your equity position within 5 to 10 years of putting money in a risky stage. It's essentially a very early private equity deal. And that's premised on, forever growth. And you think, okay. And at the time, I still was very much in that thinking that the system is okay. But then in the last 12 months, the Bitcoin rabbit hole takes you right in there. And Jeff Booth has some incredible insight around the impact of technology and how it's deflationary. So when you think about, for example, making a phone call is now free, essentially, if you have an internet connection. Whereas, when I was a teenager 20 years ago, I had my mobile phone and I could send a text message, or I had my pay-as-you-go, credit, and you get your 5 or 10 quid and it would then run out once you've used it. That's how quickly that's changed. And, 10, 15 years, it's now basically free with an internet connection. Or, you've got 20,000 photographs in your pocket. Or you used to have photo albums. Or you've now got, all that music in your pocket, which is costing you $10 a month. And previously it would have cost however much. All of these tools around us are making life easier, faster. And that is an interesting insight when you consider that prices are going up. Why are prices going up? Everything they're all going up. Everything's factored on growth. We look at gross domestic product as the key driver of a supposedly healthy economy. But what even is that? Well, that's the total output of the economy. What does that mean? Is that actually productivity? Like, how much more stuff have we created for the same inputs? No, it's the total output. It's like a revenue rather than a net profit. And once you get down into this rabbit hole with Bitcoin and you start to think, well, hang on a second. So if there's £100 in circulation this year, and next year there's £150 in circulation because the central bank can just print more money, there's all this like free money just sitting around. And what do people do with it? Well, they spend it on infrastructure projects. They spend it on shit they don't necessarily need. This whole concept of time preference that Safety Namus talks brilliantly about in the Bitcoin Standard. And I suddenly was thinking, wow, what the hell's going on here? And in short, I believe Bitcoin is the best sustainability solution we have today. Fact. And that's even having done years of trying to start, sustainability focused businesses and investing into sustainable startups. And it's all premised on future growth. But when you grow at the speed we're growing at with money that's free, you don't have any kind of stop loss effectively, or there's no breaks in the system. There's no in the banking system, for example, moral hazard is something that's apparently in existence. But it's the biggest bullshit you've ever heard, because people can misbehave, use funds however they want, and they get bailed out. Oh, don't worry about it. Too big to fail. We'll give you money. And they just print more of it, and it just happens again and happens again. And so there's actually something far more fundamentally wrong than, you shouldn't use a combustion engine, or you shouldn't eat meat, or whatever these statements are that are apparently, backed by data and a scientific study, which again, if you dig further into that, all it's really showing is that whoever paid for the study got what they wanted to be said. Right. Do you know what I mean? When you ever dig a little further in. And so, where am I going with all this? Bit of a ramble, sorry. But yes, so you touched on sustainability. And in my opinion, Bitcoin is the most important sustainability solution out there, regardless of its energy consumption, purely because of the economic model that it brings to the table, which ultimately extends long-term thinking and reduces like bad debt, basically. Like you only invest into a project if you believe that equity will return the kind of returns required compared to the risk of that. And then this all comes back to, you can't save money. You can't. You keep £10 in a bank for a year. Next year, it's only worth, it's still £10, but the purchasing power is reducing every year. Right. And so you're forced to invest, which means you take risk. But saving and investing today are totally synonymous. It's been normalized to, own a bunch of index-linked funds, own some stock, own some property, own some currency, own some commodities. None of us know what we're doing. We're not professional investors, but you can't
Right.
save money. So you spend it on all this stupid stuff that you don't need. Meantime, we are fishing the ocean faster than before. Meantime, we are doing, X, Y, Z. And it's like the system is fundamentally flawed when it's focused on growth with an inflationary money supply.
Right.
And no one really talks about this in the sustainability circles, which is fascinating because in my mind, there is so much talent in clean tech, sustainability focused entrepreneurship today that hasn't yet woken up to the opportunity that Bitcoin is to solve the problem that they're trying to solve with the wrong mindset.
Right.
And that is fucking exciting.
We're going to take
I've talked about too much, Gordon.
No, we're going to take a 4-hour conversation and condense it down into an hour. I'm convinced we'll be able to succeed at this. But it's just there's so many things,
too many subjects all at the same time. Wow.
That's what I love about this. I mean, I guarantee you that if we set this date and just jumped right into it a year from now, the level of things that we would understand that we have no clue about right now, they'll just increase because that's, that really is the effect, the Bitcoin effect, if you want to call it something. Mm-hmm. Before I address some of the, we agree on so many of these things. Before I touch on some of those, tell me about the newsletter and where somebody goes to subscribe.
Well, my Twitter handle is Jake Woodhouse, and you can head there and follow me there, and I'll reach out and talk back. Whereas the newsletter is bitcoinwithjake.substack.com, and I am sending out a weekly newsletter as of today. It's generally a synopsis of 3 subjects I've seen in the last week, and shouldn't take any more than kind of 5 minutes or so to read through.
That's
just
great.
Starting. I'm hoping it will be a success, but who knows? I'm interested to make more Bitcoin friends, basically, and continue to learn.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. And I mean, I get a sense that whatever areas you decide to be involved in Bitcoin, that you will be somebody that people should get to know. So that is
thank you, Gordon, very much.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what my first instinct said, and I think that this conversation is proving that direction.
Thank you. And there is so many directions to go in. I've worked in the startup space, and I think there's so many opportunities in improving the user experience. Mm-hmm. Hardware keys are still fairly complex. What happens if you send it somewhere and it goes wrong? There's still a mentality of someone will sort it out for you if it goes wrong. Whereas actually understanding that you're taking fundamental control of your money is quite daunting for people. Inheritance planning. What happens if you get hit by a bus tomorrow? Are you protected by that? And then things like gifting Bitcoin should be literally click of a button. Right. Like I remember growing up and a godparent would give you £5. I don't want to give someone £5. I want to give them £5 worth of Bitcoin. And it should be as easy as just boom, there you go. And it's currently not. And then there's the whole educational piece. I mean, user penetration, 1 or 2% of the global population. So in my mind, Bitcoin education is one of the most important subjects you could possibly teach yourself about, but only 1 or 2% of the world know about it right now. So it's a huge opportunity to build communities of people and create educational content, for example. Then there's the kind of trading angle to it. Then there's the mining aspect to it, building Bitcoin mining businesses. There's so many different opportunities to create, basically. And so I don't know where personally I'm going to fall in that category. And the newsletter is just, I think, a weekly thing that I wanted to commit to that was fairly straightforward for me to actually do. And we'll see where it all goes.
Well, and not unlike what you were talking about, just, when somebody's trying to understand it, you say, go and buy $100 worth of Bitcoin, get the wheels started and it gets you into the game. I think that that's probably the newsletter for you too. It is like the more knowledge you have, the more difficult it is to necessarily know exactly where your niche is going to be. But a newsletter is always something, that we can benefit from. So that's awesome. Yeah, I am.
And Gordon, just tell me on your side of things, like, can you talk me through how you're going to develop this podcast, perhaps, or what your plans are in the space?
Sure. One of the things that is kind of how my process works, my thinking works, is I definitely like to learn through teaching. So when I grab onto something and it's exciting to me, I want to try to capture some of that. And the podcast is one of those places where I just want to talk through these things. I'll use some of the time for my own just thinking out loud. Just here's what Gordon thinks about these certain things. But also, so much happens in the window of just even a couple of days in Bitcoin. Just trying to be a part of that history and compare it against what some of the other things that are happening, the trends, ETH 2.0 and NFTs, everything that's not Bitcoin is also either an offshoot of that and where the world thinks those things are headed. So the podcast is a place for me to be able to, I want it to be a hub where there's a community. I believe in somehow being part of the culture of this whole thing. So more conversations like this, I think, feed into that. Eventually my goal, I would love to have these kind of conversations and even group conversations with some of the people that we probably both, look up to and have a great respect for. That takes time, and that takes, building those kind of bridges with people. And at the same time, there are people that I know in certain circles that they would understand the world in similar ways to myself, but they have absolutely no understanding of this at all. And so I'm trying to create a little bit of a platform where I can educate and bring some other people in, maybe do private webinars, get myself a little more familiar with using this Zoom thing, and take advantage of technology since it's there, and train and instruct and help people, I think, especially be prepared for the future that's coming. It's coming at us very quick. And I think that one of the greatest dangers to everything that matters on the planet now is the political sphere. It shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be the way that it is. Historically, civilizations rise and fall, usually because of those in power. They hunger for more control and more power, and eventually that extends beyond their resources. And oftentimes it's the plebeians that are the resources. So, it's very rare that you have a system of government or governance that gives more and more freedom to the people. So, whether it's the podcast or, Gordon writing articles or whatever this other stuff, I believe in the power of these conversations build stronger communities. And perhaps one of the cool things that could happen is that we overcome some of that mentality. And you touched on some really important stuff with the sustainability stuff, because, I love tech. I love technology. I've been in the technology side of things for a long time, just from the audio software side of things. But that, that's an important perspective of mine looking at Bitcoin. But I don't know it from the inside view of the programmer. I can look from the outside looking in and understand what's going on with them, but they have a perspective that we don't even know. So when we can build communities around the fascination of this thing, even with some things that we may disagree about, my hope is that helps us do a similar thing that the Bitcoin network has done for money or just transacting, which is to separate it from that political level narrative and let it actually be about the things that we're supposed to care about. So and that's a very challenging thing to do, but sustainability is a great example where if you take just, climate change, man-made climate change, does it exist? Of course it exists on some level, because we're on the planet and we're using resources and we breathe. And the more of us that there are, there's still, you have one Earth, but whatever number of people. And at the same time, when you go all the way back to the beginning of the IPCC data, there has been manipulation and political incentives. And that's without, regardless of where somebody stands, they shouldn't be okay with the outcome, there being a goal with the outcome instead of that goal being actually improving things with man-made climate change. So it's almost like for 30 or 40 years, they've embraced the topic, they've embraced the crisis, without really trying that hard towards the solutions.
Mm.
With Bitcoin, it's just one of these examples where the entire tech world can come in and look at it as a layer 1 platform to which layer 2 or 3 can be solutions to all of these different things.
Mm.
And so that's, people like yourself and myself, and I mean, I know a handful of others, but I think that, even on Twitter, a lot of what that speaks to is that there's thousands and thousands of people that are in this field already that still have not had that aha moment. They're chasing around what they think is going to be a 10x over and over and over again. And it still hasn't occurred to them that we have kind of a window of time to kind of break free from, let's not live years like 2020 again. Let's not have the future be just kind of handing more and more little bits of control over to somebody that maybe doesn't really have our best interest.
What I like as well about some of the points you mentioned there, Gordon, it's really crucial to ask the question why, and do it. I don't know if you've ever done the 5 whys, but for example, the climate change discussion. I do believe it's obvious to me that we are not living our best lives in terms of our connection to nature, and biodiversity loss is very real. Extinction is happening of multiple species, all around us, etc., etc. We could do a better job of looking after our natural surroundings. But why is climate change happening? Why is that data what it is? Who's actually paying for it? What's the agenda behind that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we haven't asked enough questions. We haven't turned and said, well, hang on, what does that mean? Who is the United Nations and their environmental program? Who is in charge of the Paris Agreement?
Right.
What is actually going on here? And on the surface, it's like, yeah, sure, let's electrify everything. Oh, maybe we should all eat no meat because apparently they, create too much methane or whatever. But even just the meat discussion, there's a heated line of argument on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no hard and fast truth. Like, no one actually knows the answer. Point where I was going with this is asking questions is crucial.
Yes.
And what Bitcoin does is it makes you ask questions. And I think bringing some kind of mentality back to the world and following on your very kind of community-driven, educational-driven goals, which I think are wonderful, we should ask more questions. And we should question authority. Why are we being given these rules? Who's in charge? Have they got our best interests in mind?
Right.
What's going on? And, Bitcoin is the new money, ultimately.
Yes.
And it's a form of money that's out of the control of the people that currently make money. And I don't mean make money as in like, way I've just made 10 grand. I mean the people that literally create it.
Exactly.
And they don't want you knowing about Bitcoin because they control us. And the people close to the money printer and the Cantillon effect absolutely love the current system.
Right.
And when you start to see it for what it is, it's a complete lie. The whole thing is a lie. It benefits a small handful of people in exchange for the control of everyone else. But it's sold to us as a good thing.
That's right.
And it's like, well, hang on. How many other parts of my life have I been under the impression that it was a good thing for me when actually it's not? And it's that moment of like, hang on, what the hell's going on here? That I think that's a really key thing. It's that asking questions. Let's do it. Hell yeah. Let's talk to, my friend Gordon halfway around the world who, I've just met through a Twitter DM about Bitcoin and see where it takes us. And these conversations hopefully spark other conversations. And, ultimately the social structures of before, government as we know it, we don't need it in many ways.
Right.
Because we now have the internet and we now have a money that is, set in a strict set of rules that is accessible to anyone, anywhere in the world, and can't be taken away from you, can't be inflated away, can be sent anytime you want it to be sent, is open 24/7. The list of benefits just are extraordinary. Yeah, I'll
That's
leave
right.
that there. But I think just the emphasis on asking questions and digging deeper into the detail and being honest with each other and actually stepping up and say, yeah, fuck it, let's talk about it.
Right.
What is money? Who controls it? Why should they control it? What's a better way of doing things? Is this working? Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Who knows where it will take us all?
Right. I'm going to back up to one of the things when you're talking about kind of your discovery process with Bitcoin. You talked about setting up a family trust. I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind talk about that thought process and what does that for people that don't understand that, what does that actually do for that value of that Bitcoin?
Yeah, so my father died January the 1st, 2009, and everything he owned overnight was transferred to a trust. So it's a UK family trust, and everything that was within that trust then remains there today, essentially. And what we have done as a trust, we have invested in Bitcoin. So we just recently put a 2% of our family trust, and we purchased some Bitcoin with it. So we didn't create a trust for Bitcoin. The trust already was in existence. And
Understood.
just as a wider topic, a trust is it's a legal entity which is used for kind of estate planning and taxation purposes. And in our case, my mother was the lead beneficiary of the trust. So we needed to look after her, of course. And it's now managed by my mum, myself, my brother and sister. And it will be in existence until my mother dies. And then, it might be another 30 years. My father was only 48 when he died, sadly. And once that process is over, then I don't know what my brother and sister and I will decide what to do with it. But they are very useful vehicles for managing risk from a taxation perspective.
Right.
And they're totally legal. So, I absolutely encourage everyone to look into this stuff. But for example, if you have a trust in place, when you die, the assets go into the trust. They don't necessarily transfer straight to the person in your will. And if that is the case, you then don't have to pay inheritance tax at the rates that you would otherwise have to just give it to your family member. Right. And in some countries, inheritance tax levels are fucking massive, like 30, 40%. Yep. Everything you've earned and saved your whole life, you have to give it all the way, like, a third of it to the government.
Right.
When you die. It's like, well, hang on. No. And so there's a legal framework called the trust that you can set up that helps you manage that risk. If you put money into the trust and then you want to take trust money out, then there are potentially taxation clauses on top of that because you are ultimately receiving money from a deceased family member. But yeah, the connection I think that's interesting about this is my previous mental framework of thinking about wealth preservation was, first of all, diversification. You want to have a portfolio of assets that protect you in the bad times and gain upside in the good times. Mm-hmm. And you have a huge variety of different assets you can buy that have historical performance. And so, you might get involved in some high risk early stage equity investing. Like I mentioned, I did just on my personal account with startup investing, but you then have, wealth management services out there that will charge you 1% a year for assets under management, and they will have money in debt. So they'll buy government bonds, corporate bonds. They'll have money in the stock market, whether they'll have, US equities, UK equities, Japanese equities. They'll probably specialize in markets within those. You'll then have currency exposure as well, and the commodities market. You then have physical property. You've got funds and funds of funds and index linked, and there's so much different financial tools out there and assets you can buy and hold. And over my lifetime, I've been very interested in how you do that effectively. And so your year-end results are, we made a 6% gain this year, or we made a 10% gain this year, or even better, we made a 15% gain one year.
And you're like, great, whoa, that's, if you have your 10 grand in the bank, you've just made $1,500 for over a 12-month period. That's a great gain, right?
Right.
But then there's some difficulties with investment that people don't necessarily talk about. So take some examples. Property. You have to pay tax to buy a property. You have to pay agents buying and selling. You have to pay solicitors, legal fees. Once you own the property, you then might want to renovate it. So you've got to spend money on maintenance. You've then got ongoing operating expenses, such as any maintenance that might come up, but also, rental agent fees. You might have tenants not turn up. You might have your mortgage fees every month. And if you don't have tenants, then suddenly your yield has completely disappeared. You might have an old building. You might have a terrible neighbor. You might have some, nearby building works. You might have any number of physical issues that can happen. And then you want to sell it. Oh, you can't sell it till the tenants have left.
Right.
Or you need to pay us tax because you've got capital gains on it, or whatever might be the case. And so, yes, you can, in theory, make money from property, but bloody hell, is it hard? It's an investment. It is risky. Things go wrong.
Right.
And then equally with wealth management services, they get paid 1% regardless of performance. And so when you sit down and you hear, like last year, $4 trillion has been pumped into the American USD supply. Right. You listen to a Michael Saylor, he's like, unless you're making 20 to 25% return, you're not making money. You are losing your purchasing power over time.
That's exactly it. Yep.
And the CPI says we've got, a couple of percent fucking inflation. That is a load of bullshit.
Right.
The assets you actually want to own are going up at rates that you can't possibly keep up with. And diversification actually slows down the performance of your investments, because you're in too many shitty investments that actually aren't beating inflation. They're all losing purchasing power over time.
Right.
And you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And this is all part of the family trust and the investing I've also done myself, learning about this to preserve wealth. So dad died. We sold the house. Here's a bunch of money. Well, we need it to supply an income for mum. We need it to, potentially buy another house to live in. But we also don't want to lose it, right? So how do you keep that value over time? How do I make sure that my grandkids get some of that to live their lives when that happens? Well, you go about it as prudently and as strategically as possible. But all of this leads me to Bitcoin. And you go, hang on a second. So I've owned this thing since 2015. And in December of this year, it was 100x in 5 years. It's still totally liquid. Yes, you might have to pay capital gains on it. We don't have any operating expenses. There's no maintenance. There's no tenants turning up or disappearing. You're not paying any management fee, 1% per year, regardless of performance. And you've got extraordinary growth. Hang on, what's going on here? And so you don't need any of that other shit. You don't need the property exposure. You don't need the commodities or the bonds or the certified wealth manager to look after your money for you. You literally don't need any of it. All you need to do is buy some Bitcoin and just keep it.
Right.
And then you save your money. And so then I go all the way back to earlier, we were talking about the synonymous nature of investing and saving today. You don't actually need to make investments any longer. You can save money again using this deflationary money that has only been created in the last decade, that of the world has not yet woken up to the opportunity. And that, to me, is what's so extraordinarily interesting about it, because the trust, basically, we just need to own Bitcoin. That's it. Now, whether or not I can persuade my brother and sister and mum to do that, different matter. I have managed to get a couple of percent out of them. And
well, I was going to say, congratulations on that part. That shows
in 5 years' time, I'm going to turn around to them and I'm going to say, look, guys, this is what I'm talking about. These wealth managers that we're paying don't look at this stuff.
Right.
And it's a threat to them because they can't get paid.
Right.
So they don't ever want to talk about it. And they believe the bloody Fed. They've been doing it their whole lives. Yeah, anyway, so a bit of a rant, but the family trust is an important protection against extraordinary taxation.
Right, that's great.
And in and amongst that,
I've picked up a lot of interesting information around like portfolio management, looking at risk, looking at, incentives. Like a wealth manager gets paid regardless of performance. Hello, does that really work?
Right.
And it's a very sticky business model. Once they've got your money, people very rarely switch investment managers. Very rarely.
So a couple
they're
of
very
really
good at marketing, but they're not necessarily, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. First of all, I'm sorry for your loss, and
thank you very much.
It actually ends up yet another thing that you and I have in common. I lost my father; he died at 54, so it was
wow.
An unexpected.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, certainly, but it's
definitely
it's horrible, and I mean, you realize how not everything in life happens according to the plan or the way that you think that it should. But it shapes, I mean, still it has been longer for me than it has been for you. But I've been on this plane a little bit longer. We don't have to talk about how long that's been, but it shapes your understanding of so many different things. And some of my experience is a parallel there too, because I helped my mom look at these kind of things. Money is a scary thing to her, even though she's been in good shape. She's managed things well. But we have one of those, money management guys that I have talked to. And, their goal is to try to, for her strategy, basically to try to stay in a maybe 10-12% gains per year. And then it costs, their services in the 2 to 3% range. So, after capital gains, if they've successfully hit that, you're basically maintaining your value at the same 7% that the dollar is going down. And so that is to say that he's done a very good job of keeping that initial money that was available from diminishing, but it's a bigger and bigger challenge for her to use it towards the same things over and over. Groceries go up, insurance goes up, all these different things go up, property tax, certainly, so the fortunately for her, she probably won't have to see, well, it depends on how bad the politics get, but she probably in her time won't have to see what some countries have experienced with the extreme hyperinflation, to where it gets so radical that you have 200 or 300% moving against the value of things. Once inflation is off of the track with the GDP, they can't hide it any longer, and that's when people panic and prices go crazy and stuff. But I agree with you that the mentality is very different there in the banking world, and I don't know how similar things are overseas, but it's an interesting one of those things to compare. Several years back, it's a long line of things that used to be seen as a service industry, things as services as opposed to making bankers rich. And anybody could set up with a Charles Schwab or Baird company or these different investment groups, and they could say, okay, how much do you have to invest? What are your goals? Do you want more? You want to spread it across really risky investments or really safe investments, mutual funds, those kind of things. And they've really moved away from the service of that to where they'll meet you at whatever level you are, whether you only have $1,000 to put into your account for now, or whether you're dealing with $1 million. These days, they won't work with somebody with less than a certain minimum. And I think it's very interesting. The effect that has is that, you can go online and you can set up your own account and attach your bank account, and you can trade or invest, and you have basically online help and an anonymous forum of people that you can ask questions, but you're paying out independently. You're going to pay a tax person to get tax advice. You're going to pay, somebody for their investment strategy, or, if they're an analyst of some sort. And so there's this illusion that you have zero commission fees on certain things if you take it into your own hands. But those people that used to be a service to people are now only willing, you're not worth it to them if you're not valued up to a certain amount. And I think that used to be something like $200,000. And now, the government, looks at it like we don't care much about the people below the 400,000 limit. So I kind of think very similar to the things that Michael Saylor has assessed from last year that really shocked him awake to things. I think that's where you see what the real number of inflation is, what's really happening to the value of money when you have, the most important, like the S&P 500 doing 21 to 27, I think at one point 29%, in a time where none of those companies are technically performing correctly according to what happened last year. What's really happening is that the flow of money, that's what's required in order to maintain the same place where they were. That's a real, that's what it's showing, is that anybody that's not in those is actually down probably by that amount. And that's a scary realization.
And that's where actually being overly diversified is bad, because
Right.
you're not actually keeping your purchasing power over time.
Right.
You're owning assets that are deemed safe, but they're safe even anyway. Yeah, I think you get the point. It's
right.
There's only really a bunch of stocks you want to own, which is essentially Amazon and Apple, maybe a Google, plus some kind of property fund or an index linked fund of some form, and then that's it. Don't bother with anything else. And then what's going on with negative yields in the bond market is just fucking mad.
Right.
But before going down that hole, I think that the point is the financial market as we know it, the financial system as we know it, is dying right in front of us.
Yes.
It's crashing. It doesn't work. Like, how can you have unemployment rates and productivity rates going in the opposite direction of prices?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense. And it's obvious once you start to research it and see it for what it actually is. It's obvious that they will simply continue to print money because there's literally nothing else they can do. Like, it's deeply unpopular to raise taxes, for example. So they're never going to do that from a political perspective. And they're never going to default on their debt because the entire system goes bankrupt overnight. So the only thing they can actually do is print money. And you go, fuck, okay. Well, that means that these prices are going to go up forever until the system itself crashes.
Right.
And therefore, owning Bitcoin is just the most extraordinary asymmetric bet, because from a purchasing power perspective, it will go up over time, but the price in fiat essentially is slightly misleading, because 4 trillion extra dollars were created last year. I think it's now 6 in total.
Right.
And in the next probably under decade, they'll go and do the same thing again, but it'll be 60 trillion next time, which means that when your Bitcoin is worth $10 million a Bitcoin, actually you want to be trying to understand, well, what can I buy with that? Have I been able to buy a house with a Bitcoin today? And can I buy a house with a Bitcoin in 10 years time? Well, then your purchasing powers remain the same. Mm-hmm. Ignore the price per se. But it's incredibly interesting subject, this.
Yes.
And again, we come back to the fact that actually it's open to anyone everywhere in the world if you want to. And this idea that the financial system is exclusive, it is not inclusive. And this is where Jack Mallers and his strike story is just fucking awesome.
Yeah.
But look at Nigeria,
that
look at Vietnam,
right?
Look at some of these other lower socioeconomic countries globally. Bitcoin is flying.
Right. And that's actually literally the next thing on my list.
Amazing, right?
Yeah, so that's exactly where I was going.
Fucking highly regulated wealth managers who charge you, X. You can only turn up if you got 200 grand. And they're basically pilfering your cash in management fees, because not only do they get paid in management fees, they then only invest money into funds that pay them. Right. So your money is paying a management fee just to get into the wealth manager. That same money is then used to buy assets that pay fees to the people that run those assets. So you're losing 1%, then another 1%. And it's just madness, basically. Yeah. In the meantime, the purchasing power is disintegrating around you. And the people are voting with their feet. The rising economies of the modern world are places like Vietnam and Nigeria, I just mentioned, and they are using Bitcoin.
That's right.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Hey, Gordon, I'm conscious of time because we've been talking too much, probably, considering we've now had a conversation and a half.
Right.
So I probably need to wrap up fairly soon. Did you have any final comments or questions or anything you wanted to touch on? Sorry, I slightly cut you off because you were going to say
that's
something
fine.
about developing nations.
I will block it off there because, I mean, obviously it's a conversation that doesn't end. That's
it doesn't, right? It goes on too long. God damn it.
But I had just I listened to somebody's podcast who has family in Venezuela, and they live in another country nearby. But they were talking about what the process is like, especially since 2020. Countries like that on a lot of different levels did not fare very well for the kind of situation that the whole world ran into. But just it is the benchmark by which we all need to pay attention, because there is kind of this, we're all in this together, but not on the topic that they were branding that last year. We all live on this planet, and we are either fortunate or perhaps less fortunate to have been born in whatever country we have been. But Venezuela and El Salvador, to me, provide two extremely interesting examples for what Bitcoin is. And you and I probably live in countries that are slower on the uptake to get why this matters. And it's not just this weird intangible thing that's still kind of geeky and way riskier than normal stock world. In Venezuela, they're talking about how essentially, they don't have a currency. They have one, but nobody uses it. And, it's such a risky hot potato thing to use it at that point. You don't even know by the time you've bought something or allowed somebody to buy something from you that you can get rid of it quick enough to maintain that value in something. And so, they have people that will use pesos. They have people that will use the dollar. And you don't know what the standard is going to be from place to place. But where you go, you're finding signs that they have been systematically kind of thinning out the population for years and years and years. And this kind of social dynamic of encouraging people not to have children and not to incur the risks of elderly that can't pay their own way kind of thing. And how all these things are tied to money. So, getting in the country, the borders are closed, but there's conditional factors. Once again, 2020 is kind of changing that mentality to where I guess a lot of us are going to have to see what side we stand on with certain mandates and stuff. But for them, it's, if you have family there and you have official papers that show that you are supposed to meet with them on a certain date, then you can get through. But they still kind of expect outsiders to pay to remain safe going through certain territories. And, there are kind of independent militias that we would probably think of it kind of in a mafioso type thing. They use their owning weapons to protect, in quotes, to protect certain regions for people to go in and out of certain areas. And I don't think that it's a huge stretch to think that this could be the price that other nations pay for playing the kind of political games they have been playing. And, in 2008, the numbers were astronomical at $300 billion, $400 billion, to bail out the banks and to basically reset the flow of money, the liquid movement of money. It took re-injecting the system over and over again. And like you said, I mean, this time around, it's $4 trillion. It might be more like $6 trillion. And we just in the US went through this thing. I don't know if you saw it with the infrastructure bill. And I mean, that's a $1.2 trillion bill. I don't know any time in history that people could just not even flinch at, a $1 trillion bill for roads and bridges. And, so ironically, they are throwing cryptocurrency in there as a way to capture some of that money, which means, the government once again wants to kind of tighten the leash on whether people can find a legal way to get out of the system into something that they believe is actually going to increase in value instead of just, not jump off, the edge of the cliff like the rest of the system. So, I think that Venezuela is very much not only could they maybe the communities there may find ways to save themselves and even lift themselves up out of this where the government certainly is not going to help. Where you have this new leadership in El Salvador, where they have a horrible recent history of civil war and violence and all the pains that go with that, to this leader that, you know, I don't know enough about their politics, whether we should actually hold this guy up at all. But it's been an exciting thing to watch in Bitcoin, just to see the first example of somebody passing, you know, a law into their government to make Bitcoin legal tender. And, you know, there were very small demonstrations against the idea because, I mean, frankly, I think you have small business owners that don't know what, you know, having that as a required legal tender will do for them. But, you know, hats off once again, you know, you went right there talking about Jack Mallers. I think that, I mean, he looks like just a kid to me, you know, but he is so on point with what he understands about what Bitcoin can do to change these things. And I think with Lightning as layer 2 and with Strike as a payment system, it just shows that Bitcoin itself, whether there are things that can keep up with the pace of all the other arguments or not, I think it's proving that you're probably better off looking at those kinds of solutions, especially with countries that really, really need it right now. When you have somebody that is like a Jack Mallers that says, okay, if we set this kind of thing up, once again, it's the people able to transact directly with one another. They can work out the price, and it settles instantly, and it costs next to nothing for them. In fact, we can program it to have as little of a fee as possible because we want it to succeed. We want it to actually impact their culture and their communities in a good way. So what you're saying is, I mean, I think that it is exactly, you know, the people that need it the most are the ones that understand it the most. And it also serves as a warning signal to us that these kind of conversations could actually shape the world and protect ourselves and a lot of people from just sitting back and thinking that the government's got it, you know, that they understand the system and money's always worked this way and the status quo will just keep going forever. So that's where I would take things, to just kind of take the big picture and say, you know, wow, you know, we're seeing some of the amazing same things.
Yeah, it's an amazing space. It's and I could talk for days. I'm afraid I have to cut it off here, Gordon. But
absolutely.
Listen, thank you so much for reaching out. I would like to highlight how Gordon basically just sent me a message on Twitter, DM, can we collaborate on something? And here we are having a hour and a half long conversation. So such is the nature of the friendship within the Bitcoin community and the sense of collaboration and excitement and passion and energy that's going around. I would encourage anyone who's listening to the end of this, it's amazing you got this far, always reach out to people, keep learning, and let's build this technology out. And it's going to be fundamentally part of the future that we'll think back on this. So I'm 33. When I'm 60, people will be like, it'll be unheard of what we were talking about today. In hindsight, be like, oh, right. So what, people didn't believe in Bitcoin? Are you serious?
Right.
Like, yep. No one even had a fucking clue about it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, cool. Happy days. And thank you so much, Gordon.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time. I will always appreciate this. So, looking forward to seeing where this brings you and staying in touch.
Yeah. Thanks, Gordon. Reach out anytime. Cheers.
Thanks so much. God bless you. Bye.
Bye.